Okay, Kathy, are we good to go?
We are, yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. Right, good evening, everyone. I understand that we're quorate, so we will make a start. Welcome to this virtual meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee on Thursday, the 24th of September 2020 at 7 p.m. I'm Councillor Weatherlake, Chair of the Audit and Governance Committee, and the Vice Chair of this committee is Councillor Hicks. This meeting is being live streamed to YouTube and will be available following the meeting. I'll mention a few key points here that will help us to have a successful meeting. The governance section of this agenda will be chaired by myself, and the audit section will be chaired by the Vice Chair, Councillor Hicks. Should the member chairing the item lose connection at any point, the other will take over the chairing of the meeting. Should you have any technical difficulties during the meeting, please contact Sharon Major from Committee Services. Her contact details are available in the Google Calendar invitation, or alternatively, please comment in the chat box. When you're not speaking, please turn your microphone off, as this saves bandwidth. You will appear on screen when your microphone picks up a sound, so this will save the stream cutting to different members suddenly. I shall allow plenty of time for members to speak on items and shall make this very clear as we move through the agenda. Therefore, please only speak when I call on you to do so. When you speak, please turn on your camera if you're happy to do so. When you speak for the first time, please state your name clearly before you begin. Councillors should introduce themselves with their title and name. Officers should state their name and title. You don't need to do this every time you speak, but it will help if you do it the first time. If you want to raise a point during the meeting, please use the chat box found in the top right of your screen, where you can type question or point of order during the meeting. I will monitor the chat box as the meeting progresses and invite members to speak one by one. Finally, on some votes, I may ask members to comment their vote in the chat box to save going through a roll call. I will make this clear when we come to a vote. As we begin the meeting, I shall ask the clerk to confirm which members are present and if we have any apologies for absence. As this is being done, can I ask members to please comment in the chat box if they wish to declare an interest, which we can come to in a moment. Kathy, would you please confirm who's present?
Thank you. In the call, I can confirm that we have Councillor Sam Weatherlake, Councillor David Hicks, Councillor Richard Clifton, Councillor Nali Patel, Councillor Colin Steers, Councillor James McDermott Hill, Councillor Mohammed Sadiq, Councillor Ali Mirahasham. We've had apologies for lateness, so we're expecting him later. Councillor Param Nanda, and I can't see any declarations of interest. So if we move back to you, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We'll now move to the minutes of the previous meeting. Members, can we approve the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 18th of June 2020? I'll allow time for members to speak if they wish to express dissent on the minutes. Members, if you're happy to accept these minutes, please indicate this or comment in the chat box.
Approved.
Fine with me.
Okay, thank you very much. I shall take the minutes as approved, and I will sign these minutes outside the virtual meeting after the social distancing restrictions are lifted. We'll now move on to consider item 5, operation of the Code of Conduct, and I'll ask Stephen Gerrard to briefly introduce this report.
Thank you, sir. Not a lot to say, really. You asked me last time if I would pull together a picture of the complaints over the last couple of years, and you'll see that is attached as an appendix. And also attached at 3.2 is the list of current complaints which are in the course of being investigated. What I would say is that over the last, I suppose, 3 months since the last meeting, it has been relatively quiet, I'm pleased to say. And most of the complaints, if not all of them, relate really to members of the public really complaining about things we have done rather than the way they have been done, if that makes sense. So a lot of the complaints have been complaints about members supporting or being perceived to support particular policies, which members of the public feel they shouldn't support. And of course, they fall outside of the scheme, the Code of Conduct. But it's there to review. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Does anyone have a question they would like to ask? Councillor McDermott Hill. Councillor McDermott-Hill is having technical problems. Councillor Hicks.
Thank you. I note on Appendix A that a number of items are noted as would not be in the public interest to pursue. Can you tell me how we decide that is the case?
Could you just, sorry, Councillor, could you just point me to which one you're actually referring to?
Well, you have a number here in Appendix A.
Yes.
There are a number which says, I'm not asking about individuals, I'm asking about how we decide whether it's in the public interest or not.
Right. A caveat to my answer is that these go back to 2018 to the then monitoring officer, and it was that monitoring officer's judgment. So I'm not exactly sure what the criteria they used, but my understanding of it would be that it's not in the public interest because it doesn't warrant the time and expense of a full investigation. So it may be a very trivial offence, it may be a very minor offence, but it doesn't warrant all of the activity and expense that goes with a full investigation. That would be my understanding of it. But I'd have to say that this was a term used by the previous monitoring officer, so I couldn't swear to that.
Okay. Is that just in the hands of the monitoring officer, or is there do the independent members get involved in that?
I would, again, I can only speak for myself here. I would invariably involve the independent member or members and ask them whether they agreed that it was an offence that, I say an offence, whether it was a breach of the code, albeit of a minor nature, and that therefore it doesn't warrant an investigation.
Okay, thanks for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McDermott-Hill.
Thank you, Chair, for that. So, and sorry about the technical mishap there. I signed myself out. I have just leading on from the question from Councillor Hicks about the independent observers. Without obviously wanting to go into sort of details about any personal individuals or anything like that, I was wondering, in terms of how the observers are sort of are chosen, I suppose, for their role in the process, is there any particular background, or are there any particular sort of anything that the council are looking for from the independent observers that they feel might help in terms of deciding or looking at any code of conduct cases or anything similar?
Again, I can only speak for myself here, and the independent members were selected and appointed before I arrived. So I'm not wholly familiar with how they were chosen, but I would be very surprised if they weren't chosen based upon some sort of, normally what happens is you go out to some sort of open competition, advertisement with a job description and a person specification, and people will be selected normally for their either experience of serving on some corporate body or some public body, so they have experience. I'd have to say the independent members you have at Sutton, I met them, I've spoken to them, I've dealt with them, I have found them highly professional, and actually I value their opinion.
Just to confirm that Councillor Hicks and I actually interviewed Mr. Parrott last year when he applied for the position.
Right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Clifton.
Thank you. I didn't know, actually, are the independent members on this call? Because they used to attend the committee when the committee met in person. Perhaps they're not, which is a pity. I was just going to add about this point. I've had a point about this question about public interest. I think, Stephen, your predecessor, I think at times came quite close to saying that it wasn't in the public interest because the legislation lays down such a complex procedure if something is pursued, and that the sanctions available are trivial. And that therefore it's not in the public interest to pursue it. And I think that if that is true, that is a defect in the law. And I think that the way in which the standards regime has been changed over time, I think has made it toothless. That is a personal opinion. I'm just interested in what one of your a number of these complaints relate to lack of responsiveness by councillors. I mean, I have to say there are occasions when I send an email, I don't actually respond to it, but if it's abusive or whatever, and I feel that it's not necessary to respond to it. I'd have thought that it could well, in some cases, be discourteous for a councillor not to respond to an inquiry from a resident. But I'd be a bit surprised if it was a breach of the code of conduct. I don't know if you had any thought on that.
I would agree with you. I think first, going back to your first observation about the, if you like, the lack of sanctions available within the code, I tend to agree with you. I think, in a sense, going back to 2011, when the Localism Act did away with the Standards Board for England and introduced the new regime, essentially what it did was it pushed back responsibility, and this may or may not be a bad thing, it all depends upon your philosophical view, onto members themselves. And essentially, I think what the legislation says is it's up to members to manage themselves and their colleagues and the standards of conduct. And you're right, there are no powers of suspension. There are no powers of removing the members' allowances or things of that nature. So essentially, it is all about peer pressure, and that's what's available to you. I think. Sorry, your second question was lack of responsiveness. In terms of lack of responsiveness, there is no obligation on any member to reply to any member of the public. And there are times when it is the right thing to do to ignore an email. Often responding to particularly to a vitriolic email in these days of social media is as likely to cause problems as to do away with them. And I think we all have a judgment sometimes to think actually that one goes in the pending tray. In my own opinion, I think it's exceedingly unlikely that any member who fails to respond to correspondence would be breaching the code. I can't think of circumstances off the top of my head.
Thank you. I see there are a couple of follow-up questions on this topic of the independent members in the chat. So if you want to address those, then we'll come back to Councillor.
I don't think at the moment this councillor. Sorry, what is the process of selection? I think that's been covered, and I think, Chair, you're probably better able to comment on that than I am because yes, you have been involved. But my experience elsewhere is it would be a process of open interview, normally done by other members of the Standards Committee, and I suspect you probably adopted a similar approach.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
So a question from Councillor Hicks. Are we thinking about selecting additional?
I don't think so. I think at the moment the two members are fine. I haven't noticed any problem with responsiveness. Normally I would go to one or the other. There have been a couple of cases where it's been politically high profile, where I have chosen to go to both of them to ensure that I could be certain that I was triangulating the right opinion. But they respond very quickly by email these days, obviously, or by phone. I've had no problems. 2 is about right for an authority of this size. I think there isn't that much for them to do. That's the problem otherwise. Okay. And if you had more, they wouldn't actually get the experience of dealing with them, I think.
Okay. Thank you. I think that was it on that. So, Councillor Mahasham, you had a question?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Stephen, for presenting this report this evening. I have to be honest with you, a couple of my questions have been taken already by Councillor Hicks and Councillor Clifton. However, that won't stop me still. In terms of, there's one aspect to this that really quite interests me as well, which is the politically motivated, vexatious or frivolous tit-for-tat complaints. Now, in terms of that element, obviously sometimes these people, these actors may not be within the council, i.e. they might not be a member, they may not be attached to the local authority. What role does the monitoring officer have in this? And further to that, what sanctions can be put on them? Because I remember, Stephen, I remember you making a comment, I think it was the last meeting, that I found very, very illuminating, very interesting. Please don't hold me to this, I might got it wrong, but you said essentially that it's the role of members to almost bring their own reputations up by working together, almost in a way that brought respectability to the role of a councillor in the kind of regard of complaints. Now, what happens when it's an outside actor? And something that might be it's very subjective in terms of something that might have happened, for example, on social media, or it might be more of a physical confrontation, might be deemed to not be within, might not need any further action or be in the public interest. However, that might be very different to the actual people involved.
The first thing I'd say is, and it's worth reflecting on the history of this. Again, I'm old enough to remember this. Going back to the Standards Board for England, what brought that into disrepute and ultimately led to its abolition was the fact that members, and I'm sure it wasn't in Sutton, but in some authorities, members weaponised the standards regime. And before elections, you could have dozens of complaints one on another by members, and you'd have counterclaims and counter complaints. As a result of that, I think the Standards Board for England became overwhelmed, and it was felt that the regime had fallen to disrepute. As a result of that, they brought in the 2011 Act and essentially took away all the teeth from the process and left the Standards Committee essentially as a naming and shaming body. That's essentially, that is what you have left. And my view is that once we have put a matter to the Standards Committee, it's almost a failure. Ideally, before then, if it is member on member or political, it should be sorted out ideally between the groups or between each other. It shouldn't be played out in public. And there was a strong school of thought at the time that perhaps member on member complaints should even be excluded from the regime. But the legislation didn't go that far. But there is still a school of thought that the Complaints Committee is not the place to play out those sorts of issues.
Okay.
You're right that you then come to another problem where you have people who perhaps are not councillors but are clearly very political in the community. I would treat those in the same way, but clearly, if I think it was trivial or vexatious, I don't have any ability to sanction the member of the public. All I have the ability to do is to write back and say, I don't think this is a proper matter to investigate. And in the circumstances, if the complaint's coming in, I do have the power to determine somebody is vexatious. Never had to do that. And if I did, I think I would probably again consult the independent persons and probably the committee. But it hasn't come to that. But when it comes to external individuals who are political, they are just as likely to weaponise the standards regime, and I do accept that and do recognise that, and I try and sift those issues out if I can.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McDermott Hill had a follow-up, and then we'll wrap up on this item.
Thank you, Chair. I just have one it's a bit of a small follow-up, really. It's about, because obviously we've got the complaints, whether from the public or councillors, in the Appendix A. And that's sort of, we've got sort of an outline of the detail of some of them. But obviously there will be complaints that sort of don't reach that stage. Obviously, without not revealing what those details are of those types of complaints, do we have any idea on the number of them? Sort of just to sort of compare in terms of what was sifted out, and then before what actually got to the stage considered as a complaint. Just a very quick question on that one.
Again, I can't answer for the schedule, I'm afraid, because it was compiled by my predecessor. In terms of the complaints I receive, the list there, I think, in terms of the period that I've been here, is fairly exhaustive. The only ones that aren't on there are those where perhaps somebody is complaining about a service issue and they've used the members' complaints process, but actually what they really wanted to do was use the council complaints process, and then I'll just move it from one process to another. But that's a fairly exhaustive list, I think, and I'm not aware that there are other complaints which have come in which are missing from there.
Okay, thank you. It's worth noting, looking back over the past couple of years, that the number of complaints from councillors against councillors has diminished sharply, and nearly all the complaints are now from members of the public.
That's a very healthy trend, I'd say.
Right, thank you. Okay, we'll finish on that. Are members happy to note the actions taken by the monitoring officer in addressing complaints? Oh, sorry, Councillor McDermott-Hill, very briefly.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick one also. I mean, on service ones, I'm not sure whether the monitoring officer can comment on that. It's just triggered something off there with me about service complaints, whether this forum would be the appropriate one to discuss that.
This is nothing to do with service complaints. There's a whole mechanism and regime for dealing with those, and I have to say that's a bit outside my purview, I'm afraid.
No, I thought it would be. Thank you.
Okay. Right, thank you. Are members happy to note the actions taken by the monitoring officer in addressing complaints? If you just put something in the chat box, or say if you're happy with that. Okay, I'm not seeing any dissent there. So we will now move to item 6, which is the update on the member development programme. And I think Matthew Stickley is going to be giving this one.
Sorry, Chair, thank you. I'm sure Stephen wants to come in as well. I won't talk you through the report because you've got it. The main thing I would highlight, though, is that we have seen increased numbers of attendance, increased performance against our key performance indicators on the programme since we started delivering a lot of it virtually. And of course, currently all virtually. That would be the only real thing I think it's worth me saying by way of introduction. But of course, Stephen and I'd be very happy to take any questions on it.
Okay, right. Do any members have any questions on this?
Yes, please, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Clifton had a comment, and then we'll have Councillor Sadiq's question.
I was just going to comment that I was very pleased to. Can you see me now? I just going to comment that I was very pleased to see the 80% attendance at the session on hate crime. I think that's good. I'm still puzzled, as I have been over the years, at the low opening rate of the members' bulletin, because it's got, there's such a lot of important information in there. And I think sometimes it must be a bit discouraging for the people who spend their time preparing all that information. But it seems to sort of go up and down. But anyhow, I will continue to be puzzled. But I'd like to say I'm just pleased about the attendance at the session on hate crime.
Under point 3.10, it says a communications plan for the being drafted to be effective in keeping the open rate. Could we perhaps have some details on that?
So one of the things with the members' bulletin is that since the spring, it was previously delivered by committee services. It was something that we'd drawn up. Since the spring, we essentially transferred it to the communications and engagement team. So they did have some input into this report. I'm sure members would recognise that they've been working very hard on the COVID response and the follow-up to that. So I think in future reports we will hopefully see some more detail there. But that improvement scheme for the bulletin will be a communications service-led piece of work, and I'm sure it will be reported to the committee in due course. I don't know if Richard was planning on coming in on that, because I've just seen he's turned his camera on.
Well, I was just going to make the point. Well, I was just going to ask members of the committee, I suppose, I assume all members are aware of it, so it's not really about, we could do so much communications, but I suppose the issue of I'm a bit puzzled, like Councillor Clifton, I suppose, about some of the low opening rates. I suppose it's irrelevant to the information, but certainly over the last 6 months, I think the information that I've read in it has been pretty relevant. So couldn't get a more relevant time almost, could you, in that sense? It might be that some members are getting that information from other places as well. Obviously, some of it is a repeat of information because it kind of pulls everything together in one place, doesn't it? But yeah, and I imagine through your groups, you're making the point about that Councillor Clifton's made about it's a good place to get lots of sources of information about what's happening in the council and what's happening in the months ahead. But I'll speak to our communications team and see what else we've got planned.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Siddique, you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure who is the right person to answer this question. Will there be any training sessions for AGM, especially new members? For this group, new members, we need. I personally need some sort of training because I've never been a member of this group before. Thanks.
So, if I may, Chair, if there's a request for individual training for a member or a particular piece of training, let committee services. We've got some training pots that we can put towards that. So, Councillor Siddique, I'll perhaps get in touch with you in the next few days about audit and governance training. But on the wider question, if members ever do have any training needs, they just need to let us know in committee services, and we can see what we can set up.
We did have a training session last year, but unfortunately it coincided with the general election campaign, so it turned lost.
Your priorities, right.
Councillor Hicks.
Yes, thank you. It's about training. Councillor Siddique mentioned training for the Audit and Governance Committee. There is free training, online training available from various audit groups. So maybe it'd be a good idea to publish those events to all members so that they could pick up on them. I think the other thing I'd like to see in general on the training is, again, an index of what's being offered to us by external bodies for training. Most of it tends to be free now because it's virtual, so it'd be useful just to pick that up and let us know.
If I may, Chair, I think on the second point actually that Councillor Hicks has made, there's a mea culpa there that he did mention to me a few weeks ago about individual training, and I do need to respond to him on that point. But to bring it back full circle, I think that's something we can probably work with communications to get included in the bulletin a bit more and to share with members a bit more. We do include things like LGA workbooks and the like on a regular basis. We'll make a concerted effort to see if we can get that information shared more widely with you.
Good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions or comments on this?
Councillor McDermott Hill.
I think Councillor McDermott Hill said that his comment had been covered.
Okay.
Okay. Right, so we'll move to the recommendations, which are to note the findings of the member development programme for 2019-20 and 2020-21 municipal years, and to note that the member development programme will continue to be delivered virtually. Are members happy to note those recommendations? Okay, thank you very much. So that brings us to item 7, the HR update, and I'll hand over to Emily Nice for that.
Hello, my name's Emily Nice. I'm the Assistant Director for HR and OD. And the paper that has been presented to Audit and Governance Committee sets out the HR activity since March 2020 to support the Council in its response to COVID-19 in order to support our staff to be able to deliver crucial services to Sutton's residents. The detail about some of the activity that we've undertaken during that time period is set out at 3.2, and I won't repeat the paper because I know that you'll have read it. But I think that it's worth noting that we carried out an employee pulse survey in June and July this year to understand how our staff were finding working through the pandemic and how well they were coping. The overall average for our scores was 7.9 out of 10, and the independent company who carried out our research indicated to us that anything over a 7 was good. The positive responses that we received showed that our staff, 9 out of 10 staff, feel that they have trust and autonomy within their roles, and 8.5 out of 10 are able to stay connected. The majority had a clear understanding of what's expected of them, and that was 8.6 out of 10. The areas that we took focus on were around a healthy work-life balance and psychological well-being, which at 7.2 and 7.3 were noted as good, but at the lower end of good, and also concern around returning to the workplace, which was 5.8 out of 10, which is perhaps unsurprising at this time. So as a result, this has really focused the work that the HR and OD service is undertaking to continue to support the workforce, so that we're supporting our staff and managers as they either return to the office or continue to work at home. And we're working on a programme which will support that as this clearly continues over the winter period. We continue to provide advice and support around the what looks like moving into a second wave of COVID-19, as well as supporting wellbeing and long-term mental health and post-traumatic support. We're also undertaking a diversity and inclusion programme in response to Black Lives Matter, and are working with our staff networks around a series of events for Black History Month, as well as a diversity and inclusion learning programme, which will launch this autumn. We are also going to rerun the Pulse staff survey in October to ensure that we continue to understand how our staff are doing and make sure that we continue to be well positioned to support our residents as we move on through the year.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions? Councillor Clifton.
I think Councillor Sutton got in just before me, but perhaps I could just say something. Emily, could I just say, Councillor Hicks and I have, I think, to some extent seen your paper before, because it was a very similar paper presented to the Council Employees Joint Committee, which we sit on. I think we noted at that meeting what is said in the paper about the resilience and commitment of the workforce during what is been an interesting time where so many people have suddenly had to work at home, and that this has created all sorts of strains and difficulties which people by and large have overcome and I think have dealt with very well. And one does actually even notice it in the paper, these comments about lower rates of sickness absence in the most recent past. I think we did ask you, I think it's worth saying something about the sort of longer preparation, particularly of HR and of the council generally, to the longer term changes that all of this will lead to. Clearly, there are some people who work for the council. And I'm conscious of the fact that the council has a very varied workforce in terms of occupation. There's people who work in finance, there's people who work in planning, etc. But a lot of them can work at home. Some of them can't. And I feel myself when I think about myself, I'm long retired from employment, of course, but I spent many years of my life when every morning I stood on Carshalton Beaches station to get the 7:35 train up to London Bridge. And I know that if I was still in that regime now, I would be very reluctant to go back to that sort of work pattern when I had demonstrated and found that I was going up to London in order to sit at a desk and look at a computer to do a job that I now know I could just as easily do at home without all the travel, with equipment as simple as a mobile phone and a laptop. And people will feel that. Not everyone, because people miss the camaraderie, etc., of the office, and the opportunities of socialising in the office, and to some extent the intellectual stimulation of it. But I think in HR, my guess is that you are thinking about that sort of longer term change and how the council and other employers are going to adapt to it. Okay.
Absolutely. We've put together a programme which is called New Ways of Working, which looks at exactly that in terms of the most effective way for us to undertake our work, so that work is what you do, not where you go. And what we will do as part of that programme is tailor service by service a charter for each service, so that we are working in the most effective way, whether that's in the office, whether it's at home, recognising exactly as you say that some people can work at home, some people need to be in the office. For our social care staff, for example, they could be working in a school, in a hospital, in a court, in someone else's home, and really making sure that we work with our service managers and heads of service to make sure that they're working in the most effective way. Also bearing in mind that for some of our staff, the home environment may be challenging, it may be not set up in the best way for them, they may have shared accommodation or other family members at home which make that difficult. And we will also build into that arrangements for people to work in the office, both in this shorter term period during the COVID response, but also into the future, and with a view to working with our colleagues in FM and assets to make sure that we think about the future of our workplaces, so that where we come together for meetings and a sense of community and team meetings and engagement in our offices, that our offices are set up in the best way.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Sadiq, I didn't see your question there. You wanted to come in?
It's okay, Chair. Thank you. Maybe this question is to Emily and Richard. Richard might have to chip in. I fully appreciate that you have been concentrating on COVID-19 and that is still your priority. But what are our no-deal preparation in case government decides to go for no-deal Brexit? What are our preparations for that? Thank you.
So in terms of Brexit as it relates to our staff, we've been working with all of the staff who are EU citizens to support them in working their way through the EU settlement scheme, and we continue to work through that. We've had great success in supporting our staff in signing up to that. So in terms of a wider no deal, that probably is a wider question for the council as a whole. But there are business continuity plans and emergency planning to support risk registers around the way that we deal with that.
Thank you. Yes, I think we'll come back to that with the risk register. Are there any other comments or questions on this section? Okay. In that case, we'll move to the recommendation, which is to note the focus of the Human Resources and Organisational Development Service to support Sutton Council in its response to the COVID-19 global pandemic. Are members happy to note that? Okay, thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the governance section of the agenda. So as we move to the audit section, the Vice Chair, Councillor Hicks, will take over as Chair. And as previously stated, should Councillor Hicks lose connection at any point whilst chairing, I will take over the chairing of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can we now move on to item 8, which is the annual review of corporate governance and annual governance statement for 2019-20? I think Margaret Cullerton is here to make a brief presentation on it.
It's actually me, Vicky Goddard, this time, Councillor.
Is it you? Oh, sorry, I've got the author on here as Margaret Cullerton. So.
It is, and I can't take any credit for the report, but we're doing a valiant double act tonight.
Okay, thanks.
So good evening, everybody. I'm Victoria Goddard, and I'm the Assistant Director for Finance at Sutton. So this report that is presented to you tonight contains our annual review of corporate governance, as well as our annual governance statement, which we're required to publish each year in line with audit and accounts regulations. So you may remember that at the last meeting, a code of governance was approved, and that set out what our arrangements are in terms of policies and procedures to align against the 7 principles that we are required to work within. What this report does is assess how well and how effective those policies and procedures work, what our control environment is like, and how robust our controls are. We are required to do this annually and publish it alongside our accounts. Our accounts are still being finalised at the moment and will be presented to this committee at the next meeting. Internal Audit do the review of this for this piece of work, and they write the annual governance statement and are required to give an opinion on it. This year we took a fairly broad approach, a slightly different approach to what we have in previous years, and we introduced a new self-assessment at assistant director and director level, partly to raise the profile of this piece of work and to help give some assurance that our governance arrangements are well understood across the organisation, and that this is a truly embedded part of our annual process. So coming out of the review, there were a number of actions and risks and findings, and those are summarised in an appendix to the report and summarised into an action plan which will be implemented over the next year and monitored throughout the year. And overall, I'm pleased to say the Head of Audit has given us a reasonable assurance over the adequacy and effectiveness of our internal control arrangements, and this report is presented so that this committee can consider the findings and hopefully sign off the governance statement so that we can publish it by the end of November alongside the accounts. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Can I ask members if you have any questions to use the chat box to let me know, and we'll go on from there. Councillor McDermott Hill.
Thank you, Chair. I have part of me was drawn to page 28 of this item, in particular because I noticed that we were talking about risk earlier on, just before we got to this item, and really it is a question, but it's also a comment as well, in that we've recently had a policy that has come through, from whether that's from central government / TfL regarding our safer, greener school streets programs, and particularly looking at principle 6, we found out via the Strategy and Resources Committee not too long ago that the council was in a position where we had overbid for certain schemes in order to put through a policy. And what I want to question really is how does that fit with Principle 6 of our sort of governance situation here?
Thank you, Councillor Clifton. Do you have a question?
Well, I was going to thank you for the report. I think it's a very comprehensive statement of in relation to the governance of the council. I think I've asked this question before. I think consultation with staff is an important aspect of governance, which we by and large do by a number of means, but in particular discussion and consultation with recognised trade unions, as is customary in local government. And I'm not sure I saw that anywhere reflected in the statement. Perhaps it's there and I've missed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nanda, you have a question?
First, I want to clarify, are we addressing the session 8 and 8A together, or just only we are talking about session 8?
8A? Sorry? You mean the appendices, tables?
Number 8 and also 8A is also outlined what are the...
Can you give me a page number for that, please?
20. That's on 31, page 31.
That is all. That's the appendices to this report. So yes, we're addressing the whole of item 8.
Yeah, are we talking about that as well, or we are coming back later?
No, we talk about the whole report.
All right, okay.
Any questions on the whole?
It's in the page 40. They are talking about the following key issues have been identified, mainly the COVID and also the managing the various models and all of the things. So are we going to have this being cross-party discussion between ourselves and the finance directors, or before the next meeting, or this will be just only done by the administration and will be given to the next audit governance committee to approve?
I
It's
have
about
no
the
idea.
recovery plan, and the health and social care integration.
These are items that will be managed by the council through its normal processes. Can I ask Mr. Simpson if he has any view on how they're going to be managed?
So the action plan, which is on page 40,
yeah,
table 1, page 40.
Yeah.
So the formal way, the progress on those is reported to this committee is in 12 months as part of the annual governance statement for next year. Clearly, depending on the item, there are different reporting lines. So Brexit, for example, we're talking about that, which is number 5 on the table. We're talking about it later in the agenda because it's on the corporate risk register.
Yeah.
The recommendations relating to internal audit, for example, some of those may be picked up in the progress report on internal audit at each meeting. So it's difficult to say. Issues around EHCPs, I'm sure, will be picked up in the People Committee in October. So every one of them, increasing financial pressures. We had a discussion at SNR 2 weeks ago about Council's medium-term financial plan and every SNR this year. So all those things of delivery of health and social care integration. I'm sure Health and Wellbeing Board have had discussions around that in the last year. Recovery plan for COVID, we've been talking about that at Strategy and Resources Committee as well. And number 2 gets discussed at Sutton Shareholdings Board. So they're all major strategic things to some degree that are picked up through the council's member and officer governance, I think. But the formal way, updates on this are provided are in 12 months.
Yeah. So effectively, the major issues will be dealt with by the service committees involved, or whichever organisation has to manage that process, but it reported back to us in terms of a progress report on how we've achieved what we expected.
Yeah. I mean, just on Councillor McDermott Hill's point, and then I'll bring Vicky in on the other points. I think he was talking about something that he felt hadn't gone as well as it could do in this financial year. This review wouldn't have picked up. This review was about 2019-20. So he's asking a very specific question, really, that not sure it's for officers to answer at this stage, and in terms of opinion on how that process was managed.
No, I think Councillor McDermott Hill is expressing an opinion based upon its future application, its current and future application. If we have those principles, we need to know how those principles were applied. Now, whether it's something we ask for feedback at this committee or within the service committee, I don't know, but we are, issues like openness, risk management, defining outcomes even, have not been done in that process. And if you look further back in the report, we had the chief executive at SNR saying that we needed an urgent review of the management process of the joint highways and transportation department. But here we say there's a strategic and operational shared service board. Who's on that board?
The shared service board?
Yes.
That's an officer board. So I'm on it, and officers of the ADs who are in the shared services and equivalent officers from Kingston.
Okay. That was quite a bombshell dropped at SNR. I would like to know what brought on the need for the review? Because clearly we've been working along, suddenly we found there was a shortcoming in that area of activity in servicing Sutton. How did we arrive at that?
It's a bit more of it feels like a bit more of a question for E&N committee chair. In terms of shared services, they're under continuous review like any service. So since I've been here, we've reviewed the HR service and the finance service. And that's part, so to ensure it operates effectively. And we've made changes to those services in the last 12 months in terms of the structure and how they work. So I think the review of the highways and environment shared service is doing the same thing. It's looking at is it still fit for purpose in terms of providing effective services for Sutton residents and Kingston residents.
Apologies. Can I just come in very, very quickly? Apologies.
Yes.
Thanks, Chair. In terms of what you're saying about review, reviews. These are very, very different times, and I think a whole host of further committees will need to be reviewed, and the management of the departments will need to be reviewed as a result of new laws that are being passed every day in various different realms of LBS's governance. We're talking about planning. I would be surprised if planning would need a review at some point, given the vast changes happening there. The coronavirus impact, the impact of the coronavirus has necessitated that changes be looked at in other departments too. And I guess E&N can be one of them too.
This review was already in process, Chair. This isn't a review into. The review referred to by the Chief Executive at Strategy and Resources Committee isn't a review directly as a result of the current schemes that are being implemented. It's about the delivery of the shared service in the same way we've reviewed the other shared services, a number of which have been in place now for varying degrees of time and need to be continuously reviewed to see they're still meeting the objectives that were set out when they were agreed.
I wish I could accept that. It was announced as a bolt out of the blue. I had been in communication with the Chief Executive and Simon Lathan about the management arrangements for the Joint Highway Service over a number of months, and nothing had been raised as an issue up until that S&R meeting. So if we're talking about...
Could I...
Yes?
I'm not a member of S&R. This discussion is a complete mystery to me. I really don't know what this is about. So I'd like to, if you've got an issue about S&R, why not take it up with S&R? But I
don't have any issue with. We are discussing the governance of the local authority. We have management procedures in place. We have this committee which is responsible for ensuring those government procedures are maintained, yet we have suddenly discovered that the governance process for one department is not suitable. It's nothing to do with the decisions of S&R, it's to do with why we ended up in that position. And I think we as an organisation need to review how we make decisions and if maybe something needs to be done more directly, more effectively. Otherwise, our governance statement is just a piece of paper. Now, we should be able to ask questions about how we arrived at particular actions. I'm not concerned about the policy arrived at by S&R. I'm concerned about how we got into the position where we have policies that are implemented, and yet we're told they can't be implemented because we haven't got the resources to deliver them. Now, that's an internal management process, and I'm worried about that. Okay, now
the issue that you're talking about at S&R, I'm afraid that it's you're doing it with reference to a particular example, which I personally know nothing about. I can't find anything about it in these papers, so I'm not quite sure what we're. Those who are not involved at a disadvantage. So I suggest we move on from this point.
No, I want a report back to this committee. I want it, but you may not decide you don't want to. I want to report back to the committee on what were the issues with the management of that department and what we're doing to resolve it. Now, that is part of the governance of this local authority. Now, I'll take that up separately if you wish. We will pass on to another item, but I'm going to pursue it because it is the way we manage the organisation. Are there any more questions on this report?
I don't think I got an answer to my point about recognised trade unions and the consultation with the workforce and how that fits in as part of the governance arrangements. I think my point was I think it ought to be mentioned somewhere in these statements.
Okay, can I ask Victoria Goddard if she can offer some words on that?
Yes, so the process for doing this review this year was focused more on the staff rather than trade unions. So we had the self-assessment, that was kind of the first stage. So individuals filled that in at an assistant director level and director level. We then took that through DMTs to flesh it out a little bit, and for internal audit attended those DMTs and broaden the discussion and dive a bit deeper into anything coming out of there. And through there went through the corporate management team, where we recommended a series of actions which have been presented here. So it doesn't specifically involve the trade unions at the moment. That's something we could perhaps I could pick up with internal audit and we could consider going forwards. I don't think we're required to consult the unions at all on it. Obviously, we would value their opinion. So that's something we can certainly bear in mind going forwards.
I think it might be useful to ratify the relationship with the employees committee, that how information is fed to them and how it comes back to this group. So if you can find some words to cover the relationship with the trade unions and how we make sure that they're aware of what is happening and that they have a part to play in feedback on that process.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Steers.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I was just going to suggest that scrutiny is probably the place to look at shared services rather than the audit and governance.
You may be right. I think there is an issue. There is an issue there of the split between the two.
Yeah.
I wonder there's a mix here of policy and management process. So perhaps we could talk about it separately, could we, Councillor Steers?
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you.
Why not?
Why not? Yes. Can I then ask if the committee agrees the recommendations in this report? Is there anyone who is against it? Thank you. I think we have general agreement there. Can we now move on to item 9, please, which is the Treasury Management Update? And who is presenting on this? Kevin, Mr.
Good evening, Councillor.
Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Kevin Kilburn. I'm the interim head of commercial finance and investment. I'll just briefly introduce this report. This report is a requirement of the Local Government Act, and as such, it's the Council's Treasury Management Annual Report for the 2019-20 financial year. The report sets out and explains the structure, the policy, the structure, and the activity of the Council's borrowing. It also covers the Council's investment strategy as it relates to treasury management and cash. In summary, the Council has operated within its policy and by extension within CIP's Code of Practice on Treasury Management and Capital Finance. Recommendations are to note the report, note that the Council performed within the prudential indicators, to approve the report as the Treasury Management Annual Report, and also to reference this report in the Members' Information Bulletin. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask Councillor if there are any questions on this report? So are we generally agreed to the report and note the recommendations?
Just one question about
Councillor Nanda, yes?
Yeah, if you look at the page 46, the local authority loans 17,300. Can you explain what is that for?
Mr. Simpson, can you explain that?
Oh, I can.
Kevin can have a go.
Kevin, can you go? Can you have a go then? Sorry.
Hopefully I can there's a
17 million, isn't it, by the way?
There's a market within local authorities for cash, and local authorities will lend to each other and by extension will also borrow from each other. So at the start of the year, at the start of the 1920 financial year, in April, Sutton Council had loans from other local authorities of £17.3 million. But during the year, it repaid 15 million of those to be left with a balance of 2.3 million. But that all forms part of the overall management of cash. The issue about local authority loans is that they are short term and they're also low cost.
Are they subject to individual negotiation on each loan, or is there a formula attached to this?
They're fairly standard and it's all done through a broker.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So can we agree the recommendations of the report? Thank you very much. We've got that. Can we now move on to item 10? We don't know where I found the page, which is the internal audit progress report. Now, is this Margaret Cullerton this time, or is it? Hello, Margaret. Welcome. You're silent. Margaret, we can't hear you.
Do you want to?
Can we give Margaret?
Should we jump on and come back to it, Chair?
Well, at least are you working now?
Hello?
Margaret, can you hear us now?
Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you now. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So, Margaret Cullerton, Head of Internal Audit. I don't know if you guys. This is the progress report for the annual audit plan. There isn't too much to report on this this time, but we'll be coming back with the paper in November with actually more reporting. So we've done 10 assurance reports since April, which I've pleased to say there's only one of those is limited, and that's actually currently at draft, so I won't be presenting that up tonight until we've actually got that finalised, because that could, if we get more evidence, it can sometimes change the assurance. The follow-up actions, we've only got 2 at the moment, they're outstanding, and they will close off shortly, because once we get the recovery plans have been agreed, we'll just close those off. But we have been asked to go back and revisit one of the schools, and obviously with the current situation, that's put on hold for the moment, so we will be going back and doing an audit on that. Just to say that we've got quite a lot of audits in progress at the moment, and as I think I said at the last committee, it's quite a flexible audit plan this year, and that we're going to be picking up and looking at areas of changing risk, especially in particular relating to COVID or COVID areas of funding or arrangements. For instance, with hospital discharges and arrangements, we're going to be looking at costs between the council and CCG. So it's sort of various bits we want to look at in relation to the situation that's going on. And a lot of those audits have started, so we'll have an update on those at the next committee. And the other thing just I wanted to point out is because we work in 5 borough partnership, a lot of the audits we're doing are similar across the 5 boroughs, so which is quite helpful. Then we can do some comparison between the councils and whether there's areas of good practice or some things that can be pulled in to help, or we can provide things that are working well here, we can recommend in other councils. So if there's any questions.
Thank you very much. Can I ask any councillors if you'd like to put up and chat whether you'd like to ask a question?
Chair, can I ask one question?
Okay, Councillor Nanda, yes, please.
Yeah, each time in this audit, certain schools comes up, and this time, for the first time, we got Sherwood Park School and John Fisher School, and they've been classed as number one, which that means it's major issues that we consider need to be brought up to the attention to senior managers. So what's that mean, and what are the issues we need to address on that? Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, the Sherwood Park School, sorry, I might have misunderstood the question, but the that's just a follow-up on an audit that was undertaken previously, and there's a priority one action that we're just following up, and that's in relation to the deficit budget, and they're having meetings to set up a deficit recovery plan. So I don't know if is that your answer, your question?
Yeah, because last time we had non-such primary, and this time we got Sherwood Park and also Fishery. So each time we are having a different schools. So it is a pattern. So we need to address these issues, isn't it?
Oh, it's. I was just going to say this isn't a new audit. This is the same audit that we're just following up the actions. So on that page 69. Non-such primary still is there as a closed action. So these are the list of audits that we've reported up previously, and it's just giving you an update on the actions that we've recommended. So it's not that they keep, we're not re-auditing them at the moment.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Clifton, you have a question.
Sorry, some struggling technology. Yeah, thank you for the report. I didn't, it's not much a question about the report, as I, about you and about your staff. I forget now how many staff you've got, you might remind me. But I'd always say in my dealings with internal audit, particularly in organisations that I work for, it does always seem to me to involve quite a lot of sort of deviling around in sort of files and looking at equipment and looking at premises and this type of thing. And presumably you're all working from home. And how have you and your staff dealt with that? And do you think it's effective? Do you think it has had any impact on your effectiveness as an internal audit team?
I think we've adapted quite well. I think we're all able to work from home with floors. We all had laptops, and I think each council's moved to more electronic forms of record keeping. So I think there's a move away from paper anyway. So I think that it hasn't been too difficult. I suppose in the early stages, people may not have been as available, or there may obviously have been areas in the council that are busy with, dealing with the emergency. So we kind of focus our work on areas that don't. We didn't put too much work into adult social care and schools. Obviously, we're not going out to schools at the moment, but we are able to get, other staff are working at home. We're able to get in contact with them. They've got files they can share with us. So, from that respect, we're able to work and get on with work. It's a different way of working. I think on the schools, we're actually looking at how we can do one remotely. So we're pulling a program together to see what sort of assurance we could get without visiting. And that we're going to pilot that and test it. So there's possibly some areas we may find some difficulty if they've still got paper records. We may have to find different ways of working. But as I say, most services have moved on to electronic records anyway, so it's not been too difficult from that point of view.
Okay. Are there any more questions from councillors? Can I ask you one, please? The deficits on the schools, what's the cause of that?
Richard would answer that.
Mr. Simpson, can you answer that?
Yeah, well, I think most of the schools are getting to some. So it's an emerging problem, I think, around schools. More schools getting closer to being in deficit. There's not many with significant deficits, but finding it harder to manage. I'm sure the schools would tell you it's because they don't get enough money. But that's a wider context. I think the schools that tend to struggle more, as you'd expect, are those where roles are falling slightly. So they're starting to lose per pupil funding, but they can't necessarily lose semi-fixed cost at the same rate. So the schools, I know there shouldn't be that many schools with massively falling roles, because we've got, we've expanded, pupil places have gone up in London over the last 10 years. But those who start to suffer a little bit and therefore get slightly smaller classes, sometimes they tend to be the ones who have a problem. Sherwood Park, as you'll know, is a special education needs school as well. So they have obviously some high staff ratios, challenging environment, and they get top up funding from the high needs budget. So it's by no means a standard school. So there's some quite complex issues involved in Sherwood Park tradition.
Yeah. So it is, because I thought we were oversubscribed to school places, or nearly fully subscribed. So it's just those two particular areas. Okay, thank you very much for that. Are there any further questions? If so, can we then take the recommendations as agreed in the report? Thank you. I think that's generally agreed. Yep, we have a list. We now have item 12, which is is it? No, it's not. I'll go back one. Mr. Barker, are you here to do this, aren't you?
I am, yes, Chair.
It's the risk, it's the risk, isn't it?
It certainly is.
Yes. It's the annual review of risk management strategy and review of corporate risk register. Welcome, Mr. Barker. Would you like to speak?
Thank you. So I'm Sam Barker. I'm Interim Assistant Director for Customers and Commissioning. So the purpose of this report is twofold. So the first part is the annual review of the Council's risk management strategy and guidance, which is appended at Appendix A. So this is reviewed each year to make sure that as an authority we are managing risks appropriately, and that we have the guidance, the controls and the procedures in place in order to do so. There haven't been a huge number of changes made to the risk management strategy this year, so some slight tweaks around insurance considerations have been added in, but no significant changes. So that's appended at Appendix A. And then moving on, so the corporate risk register can be found at Appendix C. I'm conscious that this didn't come to the last committee meeting, and there has been quite a number of changes, as I'm sure you would expect, to the risks that the council is facing. So just quickly, these are outlined in the report, but I'll just quickly go through those. So a number of changes. So in terms of the council's response to a catastrophic incident, the likelihood of that has been decreased, i.e. the likelihood of us not being able to deal with a catastrophic event adequately, because the council and our partners believe to have the adequate controls, procedures and processes in place to do so. In terms of welfare reform, so again, the impact here of the risk has changed because of all the work that's been done around that. Implementation of universal credit has obviously been rolled out, and there are some additional resources in the team now that are managing and supporting people there. Moving on to new risks, so you won't be surprised to see that a second wave of COVID-19 has been added to the corporate risk register. This is the risk around the council not being able to adapt and to deal with the second wave. But as you'll see from the mitigation, obviously there's been a huge amount of learning from the first wave in terms of the changes that were made to existing services and services that have been set up that have meant the council can continue to support our residents, communities and business through the first wave. And obviously there's lots of learning that can be applied to any potential second wave. The risk around our medium-term financial plan and financial stability has also been updated. Obviously, in light of COVID and the financial pressures that the council will be experiencing this year and going into future years in terms of impact on funding and income and other streams that we have to deal with. There's a risk that's been added around the HRA repair service, which is managed by SHP. So there's a significant change happening there, which has involved the insourcing of the previously outsourced repair service to MERS, and then setting up of various contracts which will support that repair service, and information in terms of the mitigation that officers are working through is included in that risk. And then we've got the risk around the written statement of action, which the council has now received our letter from Ofsted, which has confirmed that the council's made significant progress. So obviously, while this remains a key priority for the authority, the actual risk around the council not being able to put in place measures to address the written statement of action has been removed. And then lastly, in terms of school places, the pressure around secondary school places for 2020 has been addressed, but there will be further pressure in 2021 and beyond, as we now understand that the new free school won't be open until as early as 2023. So there's a amended risk there around delivery of secondary school places. And that's it.
Thank you very much for that. I have a question from Councillor Nanda, which is how are staff made aware of the risk management approach by the council?
So the risk management guidance and policy is made available on the staff intranet. So there is guidance there. There's also a lot of work that is done, especially around writing committee reports and making policy decisions, ensuring that risks are highlighted through those mechanisms as well when decisions are being taken. Risk is discussed on a regular basis at the corporate management team, so considered by senior officers, and obviously then risk is also discussed at various other forums. So sitting below the corporate risk register, there are directorate risk registers which have another level of detail which very much focus on service risks, and then below that services will be expected to have their own risk registers as well. So you get that real hierarchy of risk management within the organisation.
So that's spread by the management structure within each part of the council.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Clifton, you have a comment?
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you very much for the report. I'm very interested in risk, and I always find this a very interesting read. I can't help but resist the temptation to mention that, of course, if we discussed this a year ago and someone said, hey, hang on a moment, there's something missing here, how about the danger of a global pandemic completely changing our methods of working and demands on us and our finances, people they might have been taken too seriously. However, on the risk, recession and loss of income is marked as red. That's quite right, obviously. Disorderly no-deal Brexit is marked as amber. I personally feel that's coming up a bit in terms of, is it amber, is it red? IT failure is marked as amber. I've always been very worried about IT failure. I think the current, what's happened has demonstrated to us just how dependent we are on IT systems. But overall, I mean, it does seem to have been surprisingly resilient. I'm also struck by the fact that, of course, if this pandemic had happened 15 or 20 years ago, it would have, the implications would have been quite different. We wouldn't have had Zoom and all the other ways of working that enable people to work at home. You've marked as green the risks around welfare reform, and it's not much welfare reform, but I just would say that I think we're heading for an enormous recession with very high levels of unemployment. I think that's going to put very great strain on the welfare system, and that may well have implications for us and for the council and for the way we work. That's just a few comments, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want me to come
down at Hill? Sorry, Mr. Park.
Oh, so I mean, I'm just to address those points quickly. So in terms of the risk around Brexit, yes, agree, and I think the intention is to bring a specific item back to the next audit and governance to look at all the specific risks around Brexit that the local authority will be facing, and obviously that's a rapidly changing picture, but we can bring that to the next committee. I think in terms of ICT, yes, I think systems have been shown to be resilient. I think the impact of the failure would still be very, very high. So I think that's right, but the likelihood of it could be lowered because I think it's been shown that we have very resilient ICT and technology systems, and we're continuing to operate as an authority, utilising them more than we have ever before. And then I think in terms of the welfare reform, I think that was a specific risk around impact of welfare reform, but the wider impact of recession, unemployment on residents is another one that would obviously need close monitoring over the coming period when we see what the long-term impacts of COVID are going to be.
Thank you. Welcome, Councillor Matthew. Thank you. Councillor Clifton, do you have a follow-up? Welcome, Councillor Matthew. Do you have a question you'd like to put?
Yeah, just a general one. As you know, the COVID-19 figures are climbing up. So do we get a threshold number from the government at which point we have to start doing deliveries out to vulnerable groups? I mean, has the council been tipped off yet about where a government, so many infections per 100,000, where they think that it's you've got to tell vulnerable groups to stay at home? That was one point. And then with COVID-19, there's people can become very, very anxious, and I just wanted to know what the council can do, just generally, to try and make people feel a bit more, that there is a support network out there, because we've got we have got quite an elderly population, and people are isolated, and obviously with people keeping away from public transport, the feeling of isolation increases. So I just wondered what we can do to try and reduce people's anxiety. That's my question. Both COVID-19 related. Oh, can I make one more point as well?
Okay.
In schools, we in buildings, communal buildings, the approach taken to try and socially distance people in Germany and in France is that they've been looking at measuring ventilation to make sure that buildings are adequately ventilated. And I just wondered if we could look at that for our schools. I mean, the simplest way that they do it is that they're very cheap carbon dioxide monitor into a room, and you say at X number of parts per million, everything's well ventilated, then if you see it climbing to a point, then you either open windows or you move the children out, on the basis that the more carbon dioxide there is in the room, the more people are in the room, or the worse the ventilation. And it seems to be working quite well there, whereas we're sort of looking in 2 dimensions, where we're saying to people, you've got to keep X distance apart, and really we should be looking at in 3 dimensionals and looking at the total volume of air and the amount of air movements. If we want to try and keep the schools open for as long as possible, we just one of the best ways to transmit an infection is to put someone in a room that's poorly ventilated. These are just very general observations.
Mr. Barker, who in the council, which organised part of the council will be dealing with these issues to do with the public health crisis and offering advice on these areas of activity?
So Imran Chowdhury is obviously the Director of Public Health and has been leading on the council from that perspective. I think in terms of the working with schools to make sure that those environments are safe as possible. So colleagues in education have been working with schools over the summer to make sure all their new government guidance around getting children back into school can be followed, and all the environments can be adapted so that schools in Sutton are as safe as possible. And obviously any changes to government guidance, we will then work with the schools to make sure that they are supported to implement them. In terms of the support to the vulnerable groups, obviously the shielding period came to an end. It's fair to say that the council, though, has continued to support those people that need it. So just because the shielding period came to the end didn't mean everyone felt safe and able to go out again. So there has been a small number of households that the council has continued to support to regain their independence. Obviously, it may be a requirement in the future under a second wave or a local lockdown that people are required to shield again, and that is happening in some parts of the council, the country. And the council has robust plans in place with particularly the voluntary community sector and the CCG to roll out similar to support that we provided previously. So ensuring people have access to food, ensuring people have access to the medicine that they need, but also ensuring that they don't become socially isolated, and that's a key role that the voluntary sector play in that. So as part of the council's Wave 2 planning, there are clear plans in place to enable that to be stepped up again. In terms of the piece around making sure that people have all the information that they need, obviously the council supports all the national government campaigns around the various initiatives, so test and trace, and the latest, the contact tracing app, and the council also has a very up-to-date set of web pages around COVID-19 that sets out all the support advice that is available to residents around services that are being delivered by the council in the borough.
Thank you. The specific points raised by Councillor Matty, would you feed those back to the relevant bodies to make sure they take account of them? But it might be useful in the mitigation process. Yep. It would be very helpful. Yes. Thank you. There's a question from Councillor Nanda, which is about third parties like Sutton Housing. Do they carry out their own risk assessment, or do you do the risk assessment on their behalf?
So SHP have their own risk register of issues that will face them as the ALMO, who are managing the council's housing stock, and we work closely with them through the contract management arrangements that we have in place, and the joint working that we do, so we understand their key risks. And obviously they get escalated through to the corporate risk register as appropriate, and that's why the risk around repairs has done. There is more of a link between SHP and the risk register that's maintained by EH&R, because it tends to be those sort of service level type risks. But yes, that is built into the process.
Okay, thank you. Question from Councillor McDermott-Hill.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question surrounding the.
You're very faint. You're very faint, Councillor.
I have a question around the. Oh, is that clearer?
Yes, a bit better.
Excellent. I have a question around the secondary school places item on the risk register. It's sort of in two parts, really. I note that the risk is set out for 2021. However, just wondering about whether there's been any sort of exploratory work done about what the possibilities are, risks are for places in 2022. And also leading on from that, what type of cost are we sort of incurring as a result of the sort of the changes that we've had to make because of the lack of places that we've got currently? Thank you.
Thank you.
So Richard Simpson might want to come in as well, but just in terms of the pressure on school places, I mean, until the new school is built, there will be pressure on school places, and that's why, you know, arrangements have been put in place to with existing schools in terms of bulge classes and extra facilities for this year, and obviously discussions have now started in terms of what that means for subsequent years as well. In terms of costs, I'll hand over to Richard for that.
So the costs that were needed to be put in place for the year we're in, September 20, the year we've just started, were about, for increased provision in current schools, were about 1.4, from memory, around 1.4 million. So the council still had some funding left from basic need funding. So that's grant that we get from the Department of Education, which is calculated based on the increased requirements around pupil places in the borough. So that money was used for that purpose. Given there's been a delay in any new school, we've also been allocated basic need funding for next year. And I think that's about, it's over 10 million, but not much over 10 million, I think, from memory. So there is, obviously, there's a cost to providing school places, but at the moment that's funded by government, not funded by a local taxpayer.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions? So can we agree the recommendations of the report? If you'd like to use chat. Right. Yes, we have general agreement on that, so that's fine. Recommendations agreed. Item 12 is the annual insurance review. Now, Mr. Simpson, who's here to present this report?
It's Bradley's here, I think.
Bradley, is he? Ah, Mr. Payton. Welcome.
There he is.
Okay.
Hi, Councillor Hicks. So yes, I'm Bradley Payton, Head of Insurance and Pensions Administration. So as you know, this committee receives an annual update about the operation of the insurance team, and I'm pleased to report that the service continues to go from strength to strength. So the team now provides insurance services for 6 other local authorities, including Kingston and Bromley, and this generates almost £2 million of income. The education insurance schemes now have 75 schools insured by them. And that's in the face of competition from the DFE's own scheme. And this generates a further £1 million of income. The insurance programme itself remains structured in the same way, and that's set out in figure 1. And the last point I'll make is about the claims handling performance, which remains strong, and we continue to decide all claims in accordance with the relevant court deadline. So the committee is therefore recommended to note the effective operation of the insurance service. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Any questions to Mr. Payton?
This COVID-19, sorry, Chair, it's me.
Okay, Councillor Andy, yes.
Yeah, with this COVID, are we likely to see a lot of claims coming from the public sector, and what will be our financial situation? Or is it too early to say anything about that?
Yes, so I think the legal implications of COVID and whether or not employers are going to be responsible for any injury is still to be decided. There's lots of legal comment at the moment about how the courts might decide those claims. I'm not aware of any such claims that have been decided yet, and so we kind of wait to see what happens there. I think the difficulty is going to be for individuals to prove where they actually became infected. So that's going to be the main challenge, I believe, for claimants.
Thank you for that. Are there any further questions? Look, thank you, Mr. Payton. That was very useful. It's a very interesting service which seems to be going in leaps and bounds. It's a bit of capitalism run by the council by the look of it. Are the report recommendations agreed? I think we have general agreement on the report. Then thank you very much for those presentations. Can I pass you back to Councillor Weatherlake? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hicks. Does anyone have any comments that they would like to make on the provisional work plan on page 107?
Just a little one question. So it's look like next 6 months the COVID restrictions are put on place. So we will be continuing this until next year, look like 2021. So in terms of committee meetings and setup, are we going to follow the same procedures what we are doing at present, or will that be reviewed later on some point? Thank you.
Okay, I'm not sure who to send that to, really. Matthew, perhaps?
So,
sorry, I don't know if Sam will comment, but the only point I would make is that our arrangements continue to be under review. So if there were ever a change in our arrangements scheduled, then we would make councillors aware. But at the moment, we're going to continue with virtual meetings for at least the next few months.
Okay. Right, any other comments? Audit and governance training, yes. Is that something we can comment on now, or do we want to bring that back at the next meeting?
Sorry, Chair, I don't know if that was a question for me or not, but I think I did mention earlier that we would look into some audit training in response to Councillor Sadiq's question. So it's something I'll pick up in the coming days, and we can hopefully get something penciled in.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Okay, just to note that there will be a special meeting of the committee on the 15th of October to review the audit findings report, which couldn't come to this meeting because it's not ready yet. So there being no urgent business for our consideration, I think that concludes the meeting at 20:38. So thank you all very much for attending, and I will see some of you on the 15th of October. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night.